Hi, I'm Nora, and yes, my own sister stood up at our grandmother's will reading to humiliate me in front of everyone. She branded me the family failure, smirking like it was her favorite sport, like I was a forgotten footnote. But what she didn't know was that our grandmother had rewritten everything. They thought they'd buried the truth. But what if the truth was buried with me, alive, waiting, armed with proof? Stick around, because what happened next didn't just silence a room, it shattered a dynasty built on deception. 3 days. That's all the notice I got. A crisp cream envelope arrived at my Denver condo, gold embossed lettering, and a faint whiff of aged parchment. 3 days before the will reading. No text, no warning, just the letter sitting on my doorstep like a dare. Elise had promised to keep me in the loop. That was 3 weeks ago at the memorial. A memorial she orchestrated down to the shade of the roses and the statement sent to the local historical society. I barely had a moment to mourn Gran in private. Now this! I sat on the sofa, the letter unopened in my lap, and reached for the wool shawl tucked in my coffee table drawer. Gray with delicate green embroidery. E.L. Eleanor Langston, Gran's initials. The last gift she gave me before things turned distant. Guess I'm still the last to know, I muttered. Always the outsider. I stared at the envelope again, my name in flawless calligraphy. Miss Nora Langston. Like an afterthought at someone else's gala. I didn't cry. I stood, folded the shawl back into the drawer, and started packing. Portland still smelled of cedar and damp earth, even if my memories of it had faded long ago. Driving up to the estate felt like stepping into a chapter I'd been erased from. The wrought iron gates creaked open, slow and grudging, as if the place itself resented my return. The cobblestones under my tires rasped louder than I recalled, or maybe it was just my pulse. I parked by the side entrance, as always. The front was reserved for Elise or guests. The groundskeeper barely glanced at me when he opened the door. "Oh, you're here!" I didn't reply, just nodded, stepping into the chilled hush of the hall. Everything smelled of cedar oil and rosewater, exactly as Gran had kept it. Then came the assistant, Elise's latest hire. Sleek, haughty, reeking of Ivy League entitlement. She eyed me like I'd arrived early to a party I wasn't invited to. "I wasn't told you'd be attending," she said, voice clipped. "I was summoned," I replied, holding up the envelope like a badge. She huffed. "They're by the veranda, garden casual." Of course they were. They looked like they'd walked out of a vineyard photo shoot. Aunt Beatrice gave me a gentle smile and a fragile hug, her hands shaky. "Nora, dear, I'm so glad you came. Your grandmother would be too." "I hope so," I said softly. Everyone else avoided my gaze, except Elise. She turned as I stepped onto the stone patio, her voice saccharine. "Well, look who decided to grace us. Didn't know they were inviting stragglers to the reading." The air tightened. A few forced chuckles, strained and brief. Then silence. I didn't bite. I'd learned long ago that Elise fed on reactions. Starve her of that, and you stole her air. I took a seat at the far end of the polished cedar table under the linen awning. I didn't fit their world, not in my scuffed flats and $25 0-cents blouse from Target. But I was here. That mattered. As I settled, my eyes drifted to the lavender bushes along the garden wall, purple and defiant, blooming as if to mock the tension. I inhaled deeply, memories flickered. Elise getting a sleek SUV at 17, me saving for train tickets, her taking a gap year to find herself, me juggling 4 jobs through college. I was the daughter they barely acknowledged, I whispered to myself, the one they expected to stay silent, but not today. Just as the attorney emerged from the sliding doors, I caught it. Elise, seated across from me, reached into her leather satchel. She pulled out a folded document, glanced around, and slipped it under the table to the woman beside her, Aunt Clara. It was swift, slick, rehearsed. But I saw it. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a reading of assets. It was an ambush. The room shifted the moment Ms. Carver stepped through the glass doors of the conservatory. Conversations faded. The clink of teacups on saucers froze mid-motion. Even the air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. I sat still, hands clasped in my lap, pretending I hadn't just seen my sister pass a paper under the tablecloth. Miss Carver cleared her throat and offered a curt nod. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a trying time, and I'll keep this concise and respectful." Elise rose from her cushioned chair like she was starring in a melodrama, her face a mask of practiced grief. She glided to the attorney's side, resting a hand on her shoulder like they were confidants. "Let's hope this isn't one of Nora's stunts," she said with a sharp, glittering laugh. The silence that followed was thick, complicit, daring anyone to challenge her. My face warmed, but I stayed silent. Let her preen. Carver blinked, visibly thrown but pressed on. She opened her portfolio with measured care, as if delaying might ease what was coming. "We'll start with attendance confirmation," she said. "Nora, please sign this to acknowledge your presence and understanding of the proceedings." She handed me a single sheet with a sleek silver header and a blank signature line. I frowned. "Just me?" Carver nodded. "Yes, standard procedure." From my right, Aunt Beatrice shifted and murmured, "They didn't make me sign anything at my brother's reading." Her voice was quiet but pointed. I studied the document. It bore Carver's firm's logo, but something felt wrong. No specifics, just a title, legal jargon, and that signature line. "I'd like a copy of this," I said evenly. Elise's fiancé, Miles, the perennial bystander, twitched slightly. For a second, I thought he'd speak. But he didn't. Carver nodded, retrieving the form and slipping it into her portfolio. "Of course." The sun streamed through the tall windows behind her, casting pale amber streaks across the tile. A breeze nudged the linen curtains, carrying a whiff of Elise's perfume, something costly, citrusy, and biting. She tilted her head, eyes glinting with mock warmth. Nora was such a devoted granddaughter, wasn't she? Always hovering when Gran was ill, those endless calls, making her feel so indebted, like she owed her something. Her tone was airy, but the accusation landed like a punch. She didn't say it outright, but she framed me as a schemer in one deft sentence. I didn't look at her. Instead, I gripped the shawl in my bag, the wool square with Gran's initials embroidered in faded thread. A memory flashed. Gran in the hospital, frail as a leaf, her fingers clutching the shawl, her voice a whisper. "Don't let them take it all." I'd nodded through tears, not fully grasping her meaning. Now, in this room dressed up like a garden party, I understood completely. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about obliteration. Ms. Carver cleared her throat again. "If we're ready, I'll read the last will and testament of Eleanor Langston." She looked around, then fixed her gaze on me. "You may want to brace yourself." The conservatory grew still, but not silent, a buzzing stillness that hummed in my ears. I barely registered my own breath as Ms. Carver adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and unfolded the document with deliberate slowness. She began reading in a tone that tried to sound routine. Per the last legally witnessed and notarized testament, the entirety of the Langston estate, comprising the property, financial assets, personal effects, and residual income, is hereby bequeathed to Nora Langston. A teacup shattered behind me. I didn't turn to see who dropped it. All I heard was a gasp, someone muttering, "This can't be real." Elise's hand, poised delicately on the table, spasmed, toppling her teapot, her polished facade crumbling. "What?" she hissed. Ms. Carver didn't waver. That is what the document states. Aunt Beatrice's lips parted, but she stayed silent. I sat frozen, unsure I'd heard correctly. My name, everything. Then came the pause. "However," Carver said, her voice tightening, "there is a condition." Of course there was. She held up another sheet. "The inheritance requires Miss Langston to maintain the family estate, reside in it, and keep it operational for a minimum of 18 months. During this period, No sale, redevelopment, or transfer of property rights is permitted. She glanced at Elise, then back at me. Additionally, Miss Elise Langston is prohibited from initiating or facilitating any structural changes, financial reassessments, or sale discussions concerning the estate during this time. My stomach lurched, not from shock, but from the weight of what that clause meant. This is absurd, Elise snapped, standing so fast her chair screeched. That's not what Gran intended. She whirled on me, eyes blazing. You planted this in her head, didn't you? All those late-night visits, playing the saint while I handled everything? Elise, Aunt Beatrice tried, but was cut off. No, they need to hear this, Elise barked, gesturing to the distant relatives and family friends at the back. She was barely around for years. Then, when Gran got sick, she suddenly glued to her side, rewriting the narrative. I kept my gaze on the tablecloth, every muscle resisting the urge to shrink. Shame for what? She guilt-tripped her into this, Elise continued. Didn't even shed a tear at the memorial. I didn't flinch, not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew one tear would be her proof, Miss Carver interjected. Miss Langston, these terms were penned by your grandmother in her own hand, signed before a notary and 2 independent witnesses. She was disoriented, Elise shot back. She was mixing up names. You said so, Beatrice. I said she was weary, Beatrice corrected, voice low, not disoriented. For a moment, silence reigned. The sunlight through the windows cast soft shadows, ironic in a room sharp with betrayal. Did she leave anything else? I asked, my voice foreign to me. Miss Carver hesitated, then pulled a sealed envelope from her portfolio. She did. This is for you, Nora. I took it with both hands. The envelope was weighty, more than paper, almost wholly. I turned it over, breaking the seal. Inside, a single folded page, Gran's handwriting in black ink, slightly smudged. It began gently, an apology wrapped in warmth, but within lines, it said something that made the room vanish, something that redefined every memory of her. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the paper rustled. The letter felt light, yet heavier than sorrow. I unfolded it slowly, as if haste might erase its truth. Gran's handwriting stretched across the page, shaky but fierce. I hadn't planned to read it aloud, but I did, voice breaking on the first line. To Nora, you showed up when no one else did. You brought me tea when I couldn't speak. You stayed when your sister filed conservatorship papers behind my back. You're the only one who didn't push me to sell the home, only to live in it. No one spoke. Even the antique clock in the corner seemed to pause. I continued, the ink trembling like a secret. I was not confused when I wrote this. I was exhausted, but not confused. I changed the will after she tried to sell the house out from under me. I couldn't bear being sidelined while strangers toured our rooms. I looked up. The conservatory felt colder. Elise stood, a monument to resentment. A cousin shifted, clearly regretting his suit. The room tilted, eyes turning to her. I didn't do anything she didn't agree to, Elise said, voice brittle. She was ill, delirious. You think she could decide that from a hospital bed? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I handed the letter to Ms. Carver. Can you verify the date this was signed? She adjusted her glasses, scanning it. It was witnessed by 2 of our staff. The same day, the hospital nurse noted full cognitive clarity. I have the records. Elise's face drained of color. You coerced her, I said quietly, not to accuse, but to state. You met with the developer while she was battling a fever. Elise's voice spiked. You don't know what she was like at the end. She was terrified, Nora. She clung to you because you fed her lies. Aunt Beatrice stepped in, steady but firm. Enough. You can twist it, but I saw her. Your grandmother was more herself in those final days than in years. And you tried to affirm her from her life. It cut deeper than anything I could have said. Elise recoiled, looking for allies, but no one stirred. Even Miles kept his eyes on the floor, the truth too raw to face. I turned to the window, the letter folded in my hands like a preserved leaf meant to endure. I said little, only she didn't want to be sold like real estate. I respected that. And then the silence fell. Not the silence I'd grown up with, the one that meant shame, that made me shrink at family gatherings or pretend not to hear my name omitted from plans. This was different. For the first time in years, no one had a word for me. But this silence wasn't shame. It was fear. We moved from the conservatory to the estate's dining hall, where brunch was laid out as if nothing had fractured. Croissants on silver platters, lemonade pitchers beating on silk, and someone had the gall to play soft classical music like it could smooth over the rift. I sat by the window, sipping plain tea from a thin china cup I didn't recognize. Across the room, Elise glided from group to group, all smiles and delicate laughs, as if she hadn't just been exposed. She leaned too close to older guests, hand on their arms, nodding at all the right cues. Damage control, her specialty, but I had no interest in playing along. The letter rested in my lap, its creases warm from my touch. Aunt Beatrice sat beside me, silent, vigilant. A few relatives passed with uneasy glances. Some nodded, others stared, but I saw something new in their eyes. Acknowledgement. Elise's voice cut through the hum, too loud to be natural. Nora always had a special bond with Gran, she said to a cluster of family acquaintances from our childhood. She had a knack for playing the underdog. I just wish she hadn't preyed on Gran's vulnerability. A woman who used to bake cookies with Gran sighed. That's cruel. Beatrice stood, not loudly, just gathered her bag, gave me a look, and slipped out the glass doors without a word. I set my cup down, the clink sharp. The quiet in me wasn't surrender, it was fire. I rose, voice clear, cutting through the chatter. Elise, I never manipulated anyone, and I have every record to prove it. The room froze. Elise turned, her perfect smile cracking, revealing the panic beneath. Excuse me? I kept the paperwork, I said, arms crossed. Emails, signed records, timestamps, even the voicemail Gran left after you filed the conservatorship behind her back. A hush fell like a stage light dimming. You want to push that lie publicly? I asked, unwavering. Then I'll share the truth, all of it. Someone cleared their throat. A guest shifted awkwardly. Chairs subtly turned toward me. Elise blinked rapidly, her voice biting. You wouldn't dare, I met her eyes. You've mistaken silence for weakness your whole life. She had no reply. Her audience was mine now. I didn't need to shout or scheme. I just said what I should have said 15 years ago. You don't get to shame me into silence anymore. I returned to my seat, picked up my tea, and let the room unravel. But as I glanced up, I saw it in her face. Not shame, not sorrow, but panic. Like she'd realized I was no longer her scapegoat. Brunch ended with Elise's facade splintering, but the fracture didn't slow her. A week later, a yellow envelope jammed into my mailbox bore my name in cold type. Inside, a court summons. She'd filed to contest the will, alleging Gran was under emotional duress, claiming I'd coerced a frail woman into rewriting her estate. The legal term was undue influence. I stood in my hallway, rereading the words. The jargon was polished, but the message was stark. She called me a deceiver. I walked to my study, locked the door, and opened the bottom drawer of the cherry wood cabinet Gran helped me restore in college. It creaked, but I found it. The blue folder labeled in Gran's handwriting, Addendum 4. Inside, notarized documents from her final weeks in the hospital. A full addendum to the will, dated after her initial changes, stating clearly that Elise had tried to seize her finances during a fever. There was a letter to her attorney, with bank statements Elise thought were gone, withdrawals for designer bags, a yacht rental, a deposit on a vacation home, none logged as gifts. I pulled printed emails too. Gran had sent me copies, suspecting her account was hacked. I remembered her note. Nora, keep these in case I forget. You'll know. I knew. And I was done letting her memory be rewritten by someone who only appeared for profit. By noon, I was on the phone with the legal aid office I'd consulted years ago for a colleague's trust dispute. The woman asked, "Do you have evidence?" "More than that," I said. "I have her voice." 4 days later, I walked into the county courthouse in a tailored black skirt and white blouse. Nothing showy, just sharp, rooted. I kept my face neutral, though the weight in my bag felt immense, not from its contents, but from what they stood for. I passed Elise on the courthouse steps. She sized me up, then muttered to her lawyer as if I were a nuisance to swat away. At the clerk's desk, I handed over the blue fold. She scanned it, paused, brow creasing. "Is this the decedent's handwriting?" "Yes." Witnessed, signed, notarized. She flipped through, voice lowering. "You might want to brace for this," she said. Not to me, but to her colleague, whose eyes widened. I didn't sit. I signed the counter-motion papers with a steady hand and stepped back. That night, in my study, light pooling on the oak floor, I let myself breathe. This wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about Elise trying to erase history. She wanted to wipe away the months I spoon-fed Gran broth when she couldn't lift a cup, the nights I slept by her bed as the ventilator hummed, the promise I kept to let her stay home. "She's not just humiliating me," I said aloud. "She's erasing me," but silence, when honed, cuts cleaner than screams, and this time, I wasn't hiding. She'd started a war over documents. She forgot I held the originals. The sun was barely up when I left the condo, but the air already felt thick, like it sensed a reckoning. I parked 2 blocks from the courthouse, choosing quiet over plunging into the chaos I knew awaited. As I neared the square, I saw them. Tripods, microphones, people with press badges pinned to their jackets. And at the center, Elise. She was mid-act, in a soft teal jacket she wore to seem approachable. Her makeup was flawless, her voice quivering just right. "I only wanted to honor my grandmother," she told a reporter, lip trembling. "But greed changes people." The reporter nodded, scribbling. "We hear your sister's arriving soon." Elise's face tightened briefly. "Yes. I'm sure she has her story." I paused, just out of sight, close enough to hear, far enough to stay unseen. So that was her play. Shape the narrative before I could speak. Cast herself as the wronged granddaughter betrayed by a grasping sister. Use the media to bury my evidence. But I was ready. I stepped forward, boots clicking on the pavement. I wasn't dressed for sympathy, just truth. A navy coat, simple flats, hair tied back, no fuss. The crowd hushed as I approached. The lead reporter, a woman in her 50s with a pen tucked behind her ear, turned to me. "Miss Langston, care to respond to your sister's claims?" I didn't answer immediately. I reached into my satchel and handed her a sealed envelope. She opened it. A packet with time-stamped screenshots, email threads of Elise's transfers from Gran's account, and a notarized letter from the hospital nurse, dated 3 months before Gran's death. The nurse wrote, "Patient voiced repeated concerns about Elise accessing funds without permission. Advised independent review." Logged, the reporter's lips moved silently as she read. Then she looked up. "Where did you get this?" "My grandmother entrusted it to me," I said. She knew this might happen. Before she could reply, a voice cut through. "I can confirm that." We turned. Nurse Clara stood at the edge, her old badge around her neck. "I was her evening nurse. I filed a report when Elise raised her voice, waving bank statements at her grandmother during a fever. She cried that night." Murmurs rippled. A man stepped back from Elise. A woman muttered, "Shameful." Elise's poise faltered. "This is a setup," she snapped. "None of this proves coercion. She was dying. She wasn't lucid." I faced her, voice level. She was lucid enough to change her will after you tried to move her to a facility she rejected. You had a developer tour the garden while she slept. Elise's mouth worked, but no sound came. I stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to end it. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm done pretending. Done letting you rewrite history in plain sight." The cameras turned to me. I didn't waver. Silence fell. but it was hers. I entered the courtroom with steady steps, heart not calm but razor-focused. No bailiff's call, no pomp. The pews were packed. Neighbors, distant cousins I hadn't seen in decades, Gran's old book club friends, and the press. Eyes flicked from Elise's vibrant blazer to my muted gray dress. This wasn't a hearing. It was a stage, and Elise had cast herself as the lead. She stood near the bench, hand dramatically on a folder. I knew what it held. The earlier will pushed on Gran during a weak moment. The judge entered and we rose. Then came the voice that sliced the air. "We are here to finalize the probate of Eleanor Langston's estate. We'll hear both parties' evidence. Ms. Elise Langston, begin." Elise cleared her throat. "Your Honor, this is my grandmother's legally recognized will, signed, witnessed, notarized," she continued, voice honeyed. "It names me sole executor and heir, a duty I accepted not for gain, but responsibility. My sister Nora was absent during Gran's final year, only appearing when the papers were signed. I fear Gran was manipulated." The courtroom hummed. Reporters scribbled. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Nora Langston, your response." I stood, calm, holding a single envelope, and walked forward. "Yes, Your Honor. I have a later will signed by my grandmother, dated and notarized 6 weeks after the version my sister presented." The room stilled. The judge raised an eyebrow, motioning for the bailiff. I handed over the envelope, sealed in ivory, Gran's handwriting curling across it, unmistakable. The judge opened it carefully, eyes scanning. "This document appears valid, dated August 12, 6 weeks after the prior will. Witnesses: Beatrice Langston, Clara Monroe, notarized by state-certified notary Lauren Tate." Elise's composure shattered. She stepped forward. "She forged it. It's fake." I didn't react, turning to the AV tech. "Please, play the file." The screen flickered, and there was Gran, frail but clear-eyed, silencing the room. If this plays, Elise has tried to twist my wishes again. I made a new will because she pushed me toward a care home I didn't want. She met a developer behind my back and withdrew $12,000, 0 cents without my consent. Nora didn't pressure me. She protected me. That's why everything is hers, freely, with full clarity. A cough broke the hush. Elise froze, eyes glued to the screen. The judge spoke firmly. "This confirms testamentary intent. I accept the August 12 will as operative unless irrefutable evidence of fraud is shown, which, given this footage and notary records, I do not see." Elise's voice pitched. She was dying. She wasn't coherent. No one looked at her, not even the press. The judge turned to me. "Anything else to submit?" I shook my head. Only that I loved my grandmother and honored her wishes. In the front row, Aunt Beatrice nodded, a quiet vindication. As the gavel fell, I didn't smile or cry. I stood tall. Let her rage. Let her deny. I didn't need to shout anymore. By the time we left the courthouse, the sun had dipped low, painting the stone steps with warm gold. I didn't need to look to know Elise wasn't beside me. She'd lingered inside, slumped in a corner as if her lies had finally weighed her down. She didn't shout or glare, just silence. Not the silence I'd known growing up, aching for recognition. This silence was earned, final, like a book closing. Cameras flashed. "Reporters," called out. "Nora, any comment? Did you expect the video in court? How long did you have the will?" I didn't pause, offering Gran's storm face, steady through funerals, fights, and family dinners, where Elise landed another barb. I descended the steps and found Lila waiting at the curb in her beat-up Honda, hand on the passenger door. She didn't speak at first, just studied me, then the courthouse, then me again, gauging if I was whole or just holding on. "Ready?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I'm finished." The drive home was quiet, just the hum of tires and my heartbeat's faint thud. Dusk settled as we reached my driveway, that liminal hour where everything feels truer. I stepped out, breathing in pine, dry leaves, and a hint of the lilac Gran planted long ago. Inside, Lila followed to the porch, then paused by the screen door. She reached into her bag and handed me something that stopped my breath. A letter, edges charred. Familiar. Found it in your grandmother's old purse lining, she said. Didn't seem like something for strangers to paw through. I took it carefully. The paper was worn, fragile, but the ink, her handwriting, endured. Addressed simply, to my youngest, my steadfast heart. I didn't read it immediately. I sat on the porch swing, let the crickets hum, let the quiet sink in. Then I opened it. You were always the strongest, even when they refused to see. I hope you know you never needed their approval to shine. Some truths aren't said, they're lived. You lived it well. I love you always, Gran. It wasn't grand or lyrical, but it was everything she never said aloud, arriving when I needed it most. Not for validation, but for peace. Leela brought 2 mugs of chamomile. We didn't toast or speak. She sat beside me as the sun vanished behind the pines and the porch light flickered on, as if it knew the moment craved silence. I looked at the peeling paint on the railing, the stubborn planter Elise always called tacky, the wind chimes whispering instead of ringing. I thought of the birthdays I spent waiting for someone to show, the report cards, hospital stays, solo Easters hoping. But now I didn't feel hollow. I felt whole, quietly, steadily, because I wasn't living for their nod anymore. I'd built my own place, on this porch in this house with this letter and a friend beside me. Elise might never admit fault. The family might whisper about what happened, and maybe I'd always be the one who broke the silence. But that silence had shielded lies long enough. Some wounds don't need volume to be felt. Some victories don't need cheers to be real.